Welcome to the Shudder. I know it's been a few days since I put a video out. I do apologize for that. I'm trying to get some out a lot more frequent here. I just haven't had a lot of stories to go through, and it's taken me a while to find something decent. I've got a collection of stories here from the Northwest. I'm working on another fireside collection that will be coming out after this. But this is not necessarily Pacific Northwest, but the Northwest in general. And if I go to encounter forums or Bigfoot Report websites, I try to get into the encounters that are a lot more scary or incredible in some way. Not that seeing a monster in the woods at any time shouldn't be incredible, just saying. Okay, dust off that Queen Anne chair you thought was worth a lot of money after watching the Antiques Roadshow and settle in. My first encounter was east of Brigham City, Utah, above a place called Upper Docks Flat. I had been hiking with a friend all morning, going higher and higher through the valleys, kind of zigzagging back and forth. At one point, we went up to a spine or ridge, and at the top of this spine was an old cabin. I think it was referred to as the old sheep herder's cabin. In front of the cabin was a small pond. Hiking our way towards the cabin, I stopped at the pond. The water was clear and suitable for drinking, maybe fed by a natural spring. My friend started to cup his hands to drink, and did so. I started looking around the pond, which had a smooth dirt skirt around it. I then asked Kenny if he noticed anything wrong with the pond, and he said no. I said, "Look where you knelt. You left tracks." I said, "You don't see any other tracks around the pond." At such a location, there should be tracks everywhere. But there wasn't, not even bird tracks. We also noticed that there were no sounds, no birds or anything. Kenny was starting to get nervous at my finds. Although he was a friend, he didn't have the outdoor curiosity that I do. After about 15 minutes, we decided to start heading back. About halfway down the spine, Kenny heard grouse or sage hens in some pines and trees on the opposite side from where we were. He decided he wanted to hunt that side on the way down to the flats. I agreed and told him to stay opposite of me so we knew where each other were in case he fired the shotgun. He agreed, and I took the disassembled shotgun that I had in my backpack out and put it together for him. I told him I would stay in place till he was even with me on the other side. I sat and watched him descend to the bottom of the draw between the two spines. He was moving very slow and quiet. As he started up the other slope, he encountered heavy bush and thorns that were very difficult to get through. I could see him unsticking the branches of thorns that were catching his clothes as he made his way. I could see that he was almost out of the thorns, and he leaped forward and must have had a branch snag his arm. He understandably yelled out an obscenity. At that moment, I heard a loud crash higher up than him. It sounded like a 1-ton rock was dropped from the sky. I started scanning the area, and Kenny was still making noise from his injury and didn't hear what I heard. What I'm about to describe is something that I've never forgotten because of the impression it has left on me. Have you ever taken a large rock and dropped it in deep water? It sounds like a thunk, and that's what I heard. Thunk, 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 very fast. Now my eyes are racing all over the hillside, and then I saw it. It was about 400 yards above Kenny and running towards him. I'll admit my heart was in my throat. I started yelling at Kenny to get out of there and kept repeating it at the top of my lungs. Kenny finally heard me and the noise coming toward him and ran back through those thorns he had just went through. He was halfway through the thorns and must have accidentally fired the shotgun. At that point, I saw the thing stop and turn and start running the other way. Kenny was already coming up my side. When he reached me, he was out of breath and bleeding all over from those thorns. Kenny was shaking and crying. I had to keep telling him what I saw, and I saw it run away when he fired the shotgun. At that time, I took my shotgun back. Firearms are for responsible people, not those who are out of control, so to speak. We made it back to our start point in record time and got the heck out of there. It took Kenny almost 2 weeks before he even wanted to talk about it, and when we did, I described what I saw. I would say it was upright, 7 to 8 feet tall, man-like, reddish-brown hair with a white cap. The closest distance was about 200 yards away. I'll never forget it. Kenny didn't see it, but heard it coming. He said he didn't feel the thorns until he was with me on the other side. Being from Brigham City, we decided not to tell anyone because it was a small town, and who would have believed us anyway? I can hardly remember the date, but I do remember the events leading up to the sighting. It was a very warm, full day when my cousins and myself decided to do some hunting on horseback. The area that we hunted was the foothills of the Rockies at the Blackfeet Reservation in Big Sky Country. We had decided halfway into the trip to just take a ride and wait for Lady Luck to bring us something. All day was pretty good as far as the ride went, but I know that everybody still had the idea of getting a deer on their mind. We had decided to ride home through a brushy trail, hoping to run into some game before we got there. Most of the day was gone, and the evening sun was warming our backs as we made our way home. As we approached the trailhead, my cousin's horse was reluctant and fought the bridle bit for a while. We thought it was just because of it being greenbroke. Once inside the brush, a good ways in, our horses started stepping very softly and snorting once in a while, as if something didn't agree with their sense of smell. I could see the opening of the trail, and it would also be the end of the trail. One of my cousins was just about to say something when our horses began jumping in different directions, like they were scared of something. The first thing on all of our minds was a bear. We began looking in different directions, trying to find the location of this bear. I don't remember who was the first to sight what we saw. I just heard him swear and asked the rest of us to look. We looked in the direction he was pointing and saw this very tall thing running on 2 legs beside us, then turn in front of us. The thing crossed the trail in front of us about 40 feet and stopped at the edge of the brush. It just stared at us, as if in the same amount of amazement as we were, and then it just disappeared into the trees just as fast. The best way I can describe it is probably the hairiest man I've ever seen, and well past 6 feet tall. It's hard to determine the size, but the branches we found broken the next day were from 6 feet to 8 feet in some places. Some very large footprints were found in places where the ground was soft along the trail we followed toward the mountains. This was the only sight we had since then, and this was when I was 14 years old. I'm 30 now, and I'm certain I'm the first to tell anyone what we saw that day. After all these years, I'm not sure just how interesting this account will be to you. However, it left such a lasting impression on me, I have decided to submit it. I was born in Longview, Washington, and spent much of my childhood exploring the surrounding area with my friends and family. From camping out at Spirit Lake to spending time on my grandparents' farm. It was on their farm that the following incident occurred. The farm was located approximately 8 miles west of Longview High on the bluffs overlooking the Columbia River near an area called Oak Point. Although not a true working farm, as my grandfather worked for the local lumber company in town, they had a large apple orchard, garden, barn, and pasture. Water was provided by a freshwater spring located about 200 yards from the house, down a dark, almost always moist path that cut through the surrounding heavy timber. The spring ran all the time, filling a small concrete holding area, which was covered by a small shed-type structure open on one side. All us grandkids loved to walk down to the spring and sample its cold fresh water and explore the area. On this particular day, while the rest of the family was involved with other things, I decided to take a walk down to the spring. It was a walk I shall never forget. The first 150 yards of my walk were uneventful, except that it was very quiet. Complete silence except for my breathing and muffled footsteps. As I neared the spring, I began to pick up the smell of a skunk or what I thought was something dead. The path made a turn to the left and went downhill just before it reached the spring. As I made the turn, the spring came within view, along with what I thought was a bear drinking from it. I soon realized this was no bear. It was a large, hair-covered man-ape, and because I was above and to an angle, it hadn't seen me yet. I stood very still, and for some reason was not at all afraid, nor did I feel threatened. It was squatting down with its upper torso and head bent over the spring. It drank for a while, then raised its head and looked right in my direction, then resumed drinking, having not seen me as I was perfectly still. I remember hearing my heart pounding and wondering if it could hear it too and give my position away. This observation lasted perhaps a minute when from directly behind me I heard a he sound with a whistle at the end. The drinking animal immediately stood up. It was over 6 feet tall, covered in dark brown to cinnamon-colored hair, dark skin on its face and hands, dark eyes set close together. It had a flat nose and large mouth with thin lips. It had what I would describe as an alarmed look on its face. As I turned to see what made the noise behind me, I found myself looking at 2 huge legs of a larger animal, perhaps 8 to 9 feet in height. I remember I had to look way up to see its face, as it was on higher ground, and besides, I was just a kid. Keep in mind, this all happened at once. The sound behind me, the drinking animal standing up, and discovering another animal not 15 feet behind me. All I could think was, it's time to leave. I immediately ran to my left, downhill and through the woods for about 200 feet, then back up to the path. I ran as fast as I could, turning around only once to see if I was being chased. As far as I know, they didn't follow me. I got the feeling they were as surprised as I was. When I told my grandmother what I had seen, she acted very interested. She said something to my grandfather, and he became excited. They said I had just seen a couple of old local bears that had been hanging around the farm for a while. I'm pretty sure they knew more than they were telling. Isn't that always the case? Granny and Pops don't want to scare you, but they forget just how observant young kids are. Hey, I hope you enjoyed those Northwest encounters anyway. I enjoyed telling them. Please consider hitting that thumbs up, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.